So we do lots of different things in an effort to share our message, right? We gather on a Sunday morning, we live stream, we have a blog, a podcast, we have little videos and things. There are all sorts of different ways that we try and share our message. And we try really hard for those things to always be really connected, right? So, for example, Ben and I do a podcast early in the week, and quite often that then turns into the blog, which is part of what is the message on Sunday morning. Quite often any other videos and things that we're doing might be related to that. And that's a really great thing. Sometimes, somewhere along the way, we take a nice right turn or a left turn and don't actually end up where we thought we were going, but it's a little bit like having a conversation with kids, isn't it? You think you're going to start with a story, and before you know it, you're singing happy birthday. And so this week, Ben and I recorded a podcast on, I'm going to say Monday. Was it Monday? I think it was Monday. And the podcast is basically a conversation we have. Ben and I sit down and have a conversation over coffee, which thankfully Ben makes because it's good. And we talk for 25 minutes or so. And we have an idea of what we're going to talk about, but let's be absolutely clear. It's not a lecture. It's not an academic endeavor. It's not a Bible study. It's a conversation. And so sometimes when you're having a conversation, you might start out thinking that you're going to talk about something, and then suddenly you're talking about something else. And that kind of happened a little bit this week. Because we planned to talk about Halloween, because Halloween was this week, and All Saints, right? And the connection where Halloween comes from, the connection to All Saints, all that kind of good stuff. But you know, it's a conversation, so one of the things we started talking about was Halloween as kids. And so we were telling these stories about costumes we had as kids, and Ben had this story about this bunny, really cute bunny costume that his mom made him when he was, 20-something. And no, I'm guessing like 4 or 5, right? Yeah, somewhere in there, okay. Really cute little bunny costume. And then I had a story about how I had a devil costume. Some of you might remember I've talked about this before, because there's photographic evidence of me at 4 years old, I think, give or take, wearing this like full-on red suit with the horns, and I had a pitchfork, and I'm walking down the street swinging my tail. And now, you might think that seems ironic or appropriate, that I would have been a devil as a little kid. But as we were having this conversation, we were talking about it, I said, isn't it ironic being a devil, and particularly since the devil, that we made that up. And then I went on to talk about something else, and Ben said, whoa, wait a minute, did you just say there's no devil? Yes, I did. So, hear me out, because I've had some time to think about it. Because that's what happens in a conversation, isn't it? When you're having a conversation about something, quite often your heart leaps to things before your brain has actually thought it all the way through. But then when you think it all the way through afterwards, you discover that in fact your heart knew exactly where it was going. So hear me out. Over the last couple of months, since the beginning of September, we've essentially looked at 2 big stories from the Bible, two stories of beginnings, if you will. One is the creation story itself. And the second is, the last few weeks, we've been connecting things to the story of Noah and the ark. Primarily, we've been trying to explore things about being on the ark, the part of the story that isn't told. But really, we've been on the story of Noah and the Great Flood. And both of those are stories of beginnings in their own way. If you think back to September, it's not a test, by the way, but if you think back to September, here's some things that we talked about. I suggested, first of all, that in the creation story, God creates, simply creates, until God gets to human beings. And then God creates human beings in the image of God, but from the matter of the earth that has already been created. So the point there, obviously, is that we are connected not only to the earth, but to God in very intimate ways. And particularly because we're created in the image of God, our default setting is good. And one of the things I said, and here's the thing, is I know it sounds like I'm arguing 2,000 years of church teaching and everything, but really what I'm talking about is perspective. See, we've always talked about original sin, right? You are inherently sinful. You're not. You're inherently good because you're created in the image of God. We may have a tendency to sin, but then again, let's talk about what sin is, because we talked about that too. And I suggested that sin was actually the things that we do that distance us from God. Doing good is what brings us closer to God. So when we sin, we are distancing ourselves from God. And as part of that, I'll just mention, as part of that, I suggested that there's no hell. Because we come from God and we return from God and we're created in the image of God, and God's love and forgiveness is for all, I throw all those things together in a big pot, and it occurs to me that there can't possibly be a hell. So, on top of that, I also suggested that in the beginning, because we always think of beginnings requiring an ending, but in the beginning, there was God. And God created. Now, just to be clear, when I say God, I don't mean some guy sitting on a throne, or if you watch, what's that Family Guy where he sits on a bar stool? Anyway, I'm not talking about a person. I'm talking about something bigger, something significantly bigger. I'm talking about the idea of God being love, the universal energy that creates, the universal connection, the way we're all the web of life, higher power. All of these are probably terms you've heard people use in order to avoid talking about God. They don't want to say God, so they'll say higher power, power of the universe, energy of life, all of that. But see, I think you roll all those things together for me, and that's God. Love, grace, compassion, all of those things. The things that are essentially good. In fact, I think that whoever first told the story that is the creation story in Genesis, you know, the one that ends with every day being, and God saw that it was good. I don't think they were talking about artistic integrity or, colors or design. I think the point is that God saw that it was good, inherently good. And that's because God is good. Anyone see where I'm going yet? From the beginning, the power to create, the energy of the universe, love is good. You are good. The opposite of good isn't evil. It's the absence of good. Evil is the consequence sometimes, but the opposite of good is simply its absence. And because we can make choices, we fill that absence, we fill that void sometimes with things that lead to evil. Because evil is a consequence then of good, I don't like the idea of anthropomorphizing it, personifying it, whichever one of those fancy words fits. But you know what I mean, right? We give it human characteristics. So, for example, Neil Gaiman did a really great, awesome graphic novel that I like very much that turned into a TV show where he has Lucifer, the devil, decides to take a holiday. And where would you go for a holiday but Los Angeles? And he goes to Los Angeles and he runs a bar. Well, a nightclub, really. But it creates that idea that evil has a face. A single face. Because that's so much easier than having to address the fact that it might come from us. So it's an outside force acting on us. But it's not. It's the consequence, sometimes, of the absence of good. We can put a face on evil very easily. The moment I probably even said those words, someone's face sprang into your mind. And it might not be a guy with a red face and horns. It could be anybody. Because, of course, we perceive evil in a certain way, and we put a face on it. And that's so easy to then make it an external thing to us. But in fact, it's not. So here's where I just want to go back to the idea that I'm not arguing 2,000 years of church teaching, evil lips, sorry. What I'm suggesting is a different perspective. Think about this for a minute. If your perspective on life was that you are inherently good, and the essence of your existence is goodness, and you brought that to the table every time, what would happen? But if somebody tells you you're inherently sinful and prone to sin and doing bad stuff, and you bring that to the table, what happens? Imagine how different the world would be if everyone approached life from the perspective of, I am good. I am goodness. I am love and grace. Did I mention that one of the things we also talked about was that because we're created in the image of God, and in fact all creation is created from God, that there is God in you, as readily as there is Jesus in you, as readily as there is Gandhi or Martin Luther King. Any of those faces that we put on goodness, that's your face, because you're inherently good. See, it's often much easier for us to immediately think of somebody who's evil. In fact, like I said, the moment I said the face of evil, someone's face sprang into your mind. And that might be all different, right? You might all have thought of Trump, but you probably there were many different faces. That was just a joke. Mostly. But the thing is that whoever we are, however we are, whatever position we have in life, if we approached our life from the perspective of, I am inherently good, and good is about love and compassion and grace, creativity, things that are life-giving. Remember God being the power of life? Life-giving. You can fake that, by the way, or you can behave good. Or you can remember what Jesus said about the greatest commandment. In fact, you can even remember what Deuteronomy says about the greatest commandment. With all your heart and your soul and your mind and strength. Every fiber of you is connected to God. That love and goodness and grace. We have free will. Do you remember how I told the story of Adam and Eve acquiring free will? Instead of telling the story as if Adam and Eve sin and are then cast out of Eden into whatever hell this is, I tried to tell it from the point of view of God wants us to have free will. Well, you can't just hand somebody free will, you have to take it. You have to act it yourself. So God comes up with a way for us to acquire free will. And then we don't get cast out of the garden. We step out boldly into a different kind of world. A world that's still the creation of God, that's still the beauty and wonder and amazing, wonderful thing that it is. But our perspective on it is different now because we have free will. We can make choices. So we step out. It does not help my cause that the first story that comes after that is Cain and Abel. But nonetheless, it does make the point that we have choices. And apparently we sometimes choose things that lead to evil being in the world. But evil, and I'm paraphrasing, I think Martin Luther King Jr., evil is not defeated by evil. Hate isn't defeated by hate. It's defeated by love and good. It's defeated by reminding people that their perspective on life should be that we come from good. We come from grace and compassion and love. You might be thinking now, okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it, an interesting perspective, if you like. But the practical application of that now is going to be fairly difficult, given how much gray there is in the world. Things are not good and bad. There's a lot of wash in between. And the stuff that's bad is, oh my goodness, bad. So how do we address that? Again, you can't address it with hate. You can't address it with evil or anger. You can only address it with love. Will it be defeated in this moment? Maybe not. But at some point in the future, we might kind of look back and go, we took a step there in the right direction. And look where it has led us to. The world is a very interesting place right now. Because it's kind of, I know there's undoubtedly people who read their Bible daily who are looking at the world and wondering why there hasn't been a flood yet. Because you could very easily look at the world and go, we are once again at that point. Where why isn't God looking down going, I just said looking down, didn't I? Looking down going, well, that is actually the perspective, isn't it, really? Looking down going, this didn't work out well, let's try again. But that's happened repeatedly since that great flood story. People have repeatedly tried to move us. There have been prophets. There's been Jesus. There's been great people since Jesus who have tried to move us in the direction of good and are still trying to move us in the direction of good. Let me remind you once again, as followers of Jesus, that the one thing Jesus never demanded of you was perfection. Jesus never demanded that we succeed flawlessly at everything, especially love. He simply said, love each other the way I showed you to love. And that way is wholeness. It's not a question of loving behavior. We can all go out and behave well. But it's not about that. It's about your action being connected to what's in your heart. And finding in your heart the goodness that has been there since the beginning. The goodness of always. So all of this it's a holistic thing. It's not about behavior. It's not about thinking I am good. They are not. I shall avoid them. Embrace them. With all your heart, and with all your mind, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. Think with all your mind, and with all your soul, and with all your heart, and with all your strength. Love with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. It doesn't matter what order you put them in. They're all one. And at the heart of that is good. From the beginning. Always good. If we could find that wholeness, imagine how things would change.